What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, December 2nd edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. Only a 4-game NBA slate tonight, but a lot of moving parts, a lot of questionable players on this one. Only a couple teams that don't have questionable players. So a lot of things to talk about on this show. As usual, going to go through game by game, looking at what my large field tournament exposures would look like if the slate started right now. Obviously, those are subject to change. So my goal during the show is just to break down each game, again, looking at the exposures I'd have right now, but mostly leaving you in a position where you're comfortable with how things look right now, how they could look by the time we get to lock, things that you're looking for, news you're waiting on, all of that, and talking some strategy in the process. So looking forward to this one. Should be pretty good, even though there are only 4 games. Pretty wide spreads here, too, for the most part. The closest spread on this slate is only 6 points. So in addition to a lot of injury news, we do have plenty of potential blowouts here as well. Obviously, that doesn't mean all of these games or any of these games are going to blow out. And also, even when you do get a game with an 8 or 10-point spread, whatever it may be, there are different variations of blowouts when it comes to playing time. If you get a game that is just consistently a 10 to 15 point game start to finish, you're getting pretty close to normal minutes from most players. Whereas, obviously if you get that game that is 30 points at halftime, you are going to lose a lot of playing time for players involved. So a lot of different ways that those can go. Generally, I don't recommend getting too scared off by a big spread, but obviously the bigger the spread, the more likely that you do get that 30 point blowout that really, really sucks for DFS. But starting with Miami at Boston, both of these teams on a back-to-back. This game is a mess. Jimmy Butler is out for Miami. They do not have any questionable players, at least, but no Jimmy Butler, no Nikola Jovic, who hasn't been in the rotation lately anyway, no Kevin Love, no Khalil Ware. So Thomas Bryant is most likely the backup center here. Still no Josh Richardson. We do have Terry Rozier available on the back-to-back. He played 28 or so minutes off the bench last night. Drew Smith is available as well. I did project Drew Smith to be in the rotation for around 10 minutes. My expectation here is just that you get a little bit deeper rotation from Miami since they are on the back-to-back. And then obviously you also have Jimmy Butler's minutes to fill. Jake DeWitt said in chat, thoughts on Pelle Larson's potentially getting more minutes tonight. I definitely think he could. I projected him for 22. I don't think it would be shocking if he played mid-20s. It does depend on exactly how this rotation goes because, like I said, I projected 10 minutes to Drew Smith. I projected 16 to Alec Burks. I went 22 apiece on Jaquez and on Larson. But, again, if Larson played more than that, it wouldn't be shocking. He has been firmly in the rotation for the last handful of games. He had been playing ahead of Jovic even when Jovic was healthy. We've seen games where he plays more than Jaquez. So I certainly wouldn't be surprised if he gets enough minutes to be a decent option. He is only 3,300. I'm a little surprised I didn't get him at all, considering that I did, as you can see on the screen, project him for 22 minutes. Probably just a function of not being a great point per minute guy and it not being a great matchup against Boston. But certainly somebody that if he showed up for me a little bit by the time I got to lock, I wouldn't be shocked at that price. And if you wanted to play him, by all means. He has only produced 0.68 DraftKings points per minute so far this season. So, that's what's holding him back. You can see here that in 22 minutes, I still only have him projected for like 13 to 14 DraftKings points, but it is a 4-game slate. He's not getting any ownership. So in the context of absolute dart throws, he's not crazy. The guys that I am getting to from Miami, really not a lot of it. And the field is, I think this is probably a function of mostly how I projected this game. And then it is possible too. I haven't really looked at my player exposures yet. It is possible that maybe there's a guy or two that I have projected much differently than the industry. And so I'm getting like a lot of them and it's costing me some Miami. But you can see here, 43% projected ownership coming into Tyler Hero at 7,500, 32% coming into Bam at 8,100. I think both of these guys are fine. Like, you don't have Jimmy Butler, so you can expect increased production. Boston very well may be using their entire bench. Haven't mentioned it specifically, but for Boston, we know we don't have Drew Holiday. We know we don't have Al Horford. We know we don't have Kristaps Porzingis. Derek White, Jaylen Brown, and Jason Tatum are all questionable. So at the very least, this is a Boston team that will be missing its typical rim protection, but it very well may just be a Boston team that is playing a bunch of bench guys, in which case the matchup for Miami obviously looks a lot better from a fantasy standpoint than it typically does against Boston. But that being said, you do have a 3-4 for Miami, I believe. I know they played yesterday. You have they're still like a 7 or 8 point dog here in Boston, despite all the uncertainty around Boston. So I projected the rotation a little bit deeper here. Like I mentioned, giving Drew Smith minutes. I went 35 minutes apiece on Hero and Bam. They obviously could play more. We got 38 minutes from Bam yesterday. We got 37 from Hero. We've been getting a lot of minutes from those guys. If this were just a game where Miami didn't play yesterday, they weren't, 8-point dogs on the road. It was a closer spread. You didn't have Love, you didn't have Jovic, you didn't have Ware. I probably would be projecting 37, 38 minutes for Bam, thinking that he just plays a ton. But I was a little bit more cautious with the rotation here, just given the scheduling circumstances for Miami, combined with the relative likelihood of a blowout, at least with the way the spread is right now. So 35 minutes, basically what Bam is averaging for the year, basically what Hero's averaging for the year. It's not like I went really pessimistic here, but I think that is probably, at least to some extent, what is causing me to still get a decent amount of Tyler Hero at 23% and a decent amount of Bam at 14%, just not nearly as much as the field. I think it's probably just the way I projected the rotation in combination with the fact that they are getting a massive amount of ownership. And I do think that there are other spots on this slate in this price range that I can get to that look pretty good. So I would definitely file both Hero and Bam in the category of, obviously perfectly fine plays that I'm just not getting a ton of right now. Somebody in chat said that they think Kevin Love is probable. Kevin Love's been listed out for most of the day. So unless that just changed, nope, 4:30 injury report still out. Kevin Love listed as out, not even questionable, not doubtful, just out. Terry Rozier showed up 6% for me, 13% projected ownership. He is 5,200, which is a pretty good price tag. I do expect him to move into the starting lineup. We had seen his playing time kind of slowly ramping up off the bench. He had been coming off the bench since returning from injury. But now with no Butler, I assume that you're getting a starting lineup of Rozier, Hero, Robinson, Highsmith, and Adebayo. I went 30 minutes for Rozier. If he played more, I wouldn't be shocked, but again, I was kind of just, relatively cautious with Miami minutes here. 30, he played 28 yesterday. That was the most he's played since coming back from injury. I didn't really think that going like 32, 33, 34 minutes on Rozier, any of which could happen. I just didn't really think that was consistent with the way that I'm projecting the rest of Miami. Like if I'm going 33, 34 minutes on Rozier, which again is defensible, you should also be going 37, 38 minutes on Hero and Bam, I think. So that's kind of a decision for you to make with whatever projections you're using. I would take a look at how Miami's minutes are being projected if you're using industry projections on that site, or if you're just doing your own. I would think about these guys kind of all together. Like if you are going to be aggressive with Terry Rozier minutes, just be aggressive with everybody's minutes here. Project this to be a game that Miami just runs like an 8-man rotation and it's competitive. It certainly could be, but because of the schedule, that's just not the way that I'm thinking about it right now. But there is a decent chance that you just get 38 minutes from these two guys. You get like 33, 34 from Rozier. Certainly possible. Cos Campbell said Boston doesn't seem to cover big spreads. Yeah, Boston's probably the biggest play down to their competition team in the NBA. But again, I didn't go really low on these minutes. We're not talking about I went 32 Hero, 32 Bam, and at that point I'm essentially saying I think this game's over after 3 quarters. I handled this like I would handle pretty much any game that has around an 8-point spread, where you do have a team that is in a tough part of their schedule as far as back-to-backs, 3s and 4s, stuff like that, where I basically projected the average minutes for the season as opposed to being as aggressive as I could. Whereas, if this were a standalone game, probably would have been a little bit more aggressive here. So either way, I think these 3 guys from Miami look good. I don't think they look quite as good as the field seems to right now. Duncan Robinson, 4,600, projected him for 28 minutes. He has upside. He could play low to mid 30s depending on how he plays and how deep Miami goes with the rotation. So Miami in general, just a team that I am probably going to be a little bit below the field at projected ownership, at least simply because I think I'm a little bit, I think the Spoelstra's rotation might be a little bit deeper here than maybe the field seems to think it's going to be. Certainly could be wrong on that. On the other side for Boston, like I said, waiting on a ton of news here. For now, I projected the questionable guys in. So I assumed a starting lineup of Derek White, Sam Hauser, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Ketta. I do not know who would start at center. We actually saw Cornette get 9 minutes off the bench yesterday while Ketta DNP'd. So maybe you get Cornette starting. I went 23 minutes apiece to both Ketta and Cornette in the 3 games this year where Horford and Porzingis have been out and Ketta and Cornette have been in. We have seen Ketta start 2 of them, Cornette start 1 of them. Basically, they've split 48 minutes. There was one game where Xavier Tillman played a little bit more than 0 or garbage time. But we've seen Cornette play like at least 24 minutes in all 3 of them. He's played more minutes than Ketta in 2 of them, despite coming off the bench. So I pretty much just split those minutes. I gave 2 to Xavier Tillman, but Ketta showed up basically not at all at 4,200. I didn't get the Cornette. I think that they are decent values and they will look better probably if the more guys are out, because I do think that you could get, if everybody's out, some of them playing alongside each other. Cornette can space the floor a little bit, so I don't think they would be necessarily opposed to having them play alongside each other a little bit, which would allow you to project more minutes. Since the start of last season with Ketta on the floor, Cornette has only played 22 possessions, so maybe not. Tillman's played 51 possessions. Again, I wouldn't expect them to play alongside each other unless all the questionable guys are out. Then maybe it happens. I'm still not sure, but I do think that they would look at least marginally better if you start ruling other guys out. Sam Hauser's the guy I'm getting to a lot of. I don't really know why he's only projected for 10% ownership. That surprises me a bit. He's averaged about 32 minutes per game in his starts this year, played 36 last night. And again, his playing time will look better and his ownership will come up if Brown, Tatum, White, any of those guys are ruled out. But my assumption for now is he starts. Maybe that's not what the field was assuming. I don't really know. So I projected 32 minutes to Hauser. I projected 30 to Pritchard. This is another spot where if Boston wants to really be aggressive, you could see an 8-man rotation like we did last night, in which case, even with Tatum, Brown, and White in, Hauser and Pritchard could play more. But I was a little bit less aggressive with the minutes projection here. You have a game where they've already ruled out half their starters, and it's just a different game, a different environment, all of that, than playing against Cleveland last night. Also, these guys played huge minutes last night, so there is that as well. So I went with the 32 minutes for Hauser. That's what he's averaged as a starter this year. I went 30 to Pritchard. That's what he's averaged in the games where, similar games where he's come off the bench. Could play more, but again, with these guys in, I think that's very reasonable. If you get any of Tatum, Brown, White out, I do think you probably see more minutes for any of these guys, but at 10% projected ownership, Hauser is showing up a ton for me. If that ownership projection does come up, my exposure to Hauser obviously would go down just because he's not a great point per minute guy, but I just think he's going to play enough minutes at this price that he looks pretty good. 3/4 of a fantasy point per minute overall, give or take, since the start of last season. So just projects as a pretty good play here. You can see a 24 fantasy point projection on him. Tatum, Brown, both right around the field on them. Nothing that really stands out. 10-3 on Tatum looks fine, especially on a 4-game slate. Jaylen Brown, 16% ownership at 8,300. Shooting guard, small forward, which is always nice. That looks fine as well. Right around the field on Derek White at 6,800. I expect about 34 minutes if he plays, unless we get word that he's going to be limited. He only missed like a game and a half, so I assume if he plays, he's just good to go. And then Pritchard here, kind of the inverse of Sam Hauser, where it seems like maybe he's just being projected as the starter for some reason. And so he's projected for more ownership than Hauser at $1,000 more. The way I projected this lineup, and obviously we'll have this news before the game starts, the way I projected it, I'm just not going to play as much Pritchard as Hauser when I have like a 1 to 2 fantasy point difference in projection, and Hauser's $1,000 cheaper and lower owned. So that's really just a function of ownership. If you got 16 to 20% going to Hauser and you got closer to 10% to Pritchard, my Pritchard would come up a bit. My Hauser would go down. Zach said playing 150 today. For the show, I ran 150. I'm focusing mostly on smaller field stuff for at least today. But for the show, I ran 150. I don't think most people care about hearing me talk about how I'm playing like 100-person tournaments. My Sanyam said in this matchup, could we see Boston play more wings and go smaller? Sort of, but they don't necessarily have a lot of them. Based on what we've seen them do in previous games. I expect it to be close to 48 minutes from Cornette and Keta at center. Also, you have Bam, who's not like a giant, but he's a true center. You have Thomas Bryant most likely backing him up. So I don't necessarily expect this to be a game that like just turns into really small lineups because of Bam's presence and also because Boston is just missing bodies already. So it becomes that much more difficult to like cut out the centers. Anthony had said no Jaquez. He wasn't showing up for me. Again, I went 22 minutes there. I thought maybe he'd show up on such a small slate. He is 4,300. I have him projected for 19.5 points, 15% ownership. He just didn't show up for me for whatever reason. Decent projection on him for that salary. So a little surprised he didn't show up, but I didn't get there, at least in this run. So again, Boston, huge missing pieces. One thing I do want to mention from their rotation yesterday, I didn't get to him in this run, but Drew Peterson, who is 3K flat, despite Boston only playing a 8-man rotation yesterday, like a true 8-man rotation where nobody except for 8 guys got a single minute outside of actually the entire game. Drew Peterson played 25 minutes. So it does seem like he's probably jumped Walsh, Springer, those guys in the rotation. I projected 18 minutes here. I went 6 minutes to Walsh because I'm not, again, super confident that Boston plays this game the same way they played the Cleveland game yesterday. But I do think that's important to note as guys start getting ruled out. Like, obviously, if White, Brown, Tatum all sit, then it doesn't really matter. Like, Jordan Walsh at 3K is going to start to look good. Peterson will look good. Anybody playing for Boston will start to look good. But if, like, you get one of those guys out, then in addition to probably giving a couple more minutes to Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard, I know that I would be looking first to give minutes to Drew Peterson before giving them to Jordan Walsh and whatever else is coming off of Jaden Springer, whatever else is coming off the Boston bench. So that was just an interesting thing. We hadn't seen really Peterson play. Walsh had kind of been that next guy up, the fringe rotation guy for Boston all season long. So it was interesting. It was a different development to see Drew Peterson just step in and into that role yesterday, and even more than step into that role, like play a lot of minutes in that role. So something I wanted to mention there that could end up being important later on. See you looking sick. Can you play both together? Talking about Hauser and Pritchard. Yeah, I think so. And especially as more guys get ruled out, because the playing time on them will just start to look better and better. My general thoughts and approach on whether or not you can play guys together is that as long as they will share the floor, I don't generally have a problem playing guys together. You get different circumstances where maybe you have 2 teammates that are really expensive, so it becomes a little bit more difficult because if they both go off, then there's an increased chance the game's a blowout. But if you have 2 overpriced teammates, you're probably naturally not going to play them together because they're really expensive. So you don't really have to worry about that one too much. You do have different correlations between players that are teammates. If you have 2 guys that most of their fantasy production just comes from scoring, then even if they share the floor together, they are going to negatively correlate more than teammates who one of them is the primary playmaker and the other is a scorer, or one guy's primarily getting his fantasy points from rebounding, etc. But even then, you do also get some positive correlation because as long as they share the floor, if the game just ends up being played at a faster pace and it's higher scoring than projected, it's good for both of them. If the game goes to overtime, it's good for both of them. So the only guys that I really don't want to play together typically are your guys that do not share the floor, which is the most obvious example going to be your starting center and backup center. There are some others, and even then there are exceptions where if the starter should be 8K and the backup should be 5K, but the starter is 6K and the backup's 3K, then you can still, on some slates, play them together. But generally going to be fine playing guys together as long as they will share the floor. And then, like Anthony said, too, when they're low-priced guys, it matters even less. It's really, really easy to see how Sam Hauser pays off 4,500 in 32 minutes, while Peyton Pritchard also pays off 5,500 in 30 minutes without either of them having some crazy outlier game or stealing minutes from the other one or anything like that. See you look and said, I think they still look good if only one star sits. Yeah, they do, because we already have 3 main guys out. So again, this the projection I have here is with assuming all of Tatum, Brown, White play. If one of those guys are out, everybody looks better. If 2 or 3 are out, everybody that's in just continues to look better. Moving on to the Pels and the Hawks, where the Pels are 9 to 10-point dogs on the road at Atlanta, which is really impressive because the Hawks absolutely suck. So it's unusual to have a game that has blowout potential where the Hawks are the big favorites, but we have that here. Brandon Ingram is questionable for the Pels. Herb Jones is doubtful. Seems like he is relatively close to working his way back, hopefully, but doubtful for today. Still no Zion, still no Jordan Hawkins, still no Jose Alvarado. So this team is getting healthier. They did play yesterday, and they're not resting any of their main guys that played yesterday. DeJounte Murray, not on the injury report. CJ McCollum, not on the injury report. So don't have to worry about any of that stuff. I think it is a pretty interesting spot here because you're not getting too much ownership. And if Ingram is in, it does obviously cut into production from guys like Murray and McCollum. And they're not super cheap. Trey Murphy as well. He's the most favorably priced of that trio. If Ingram is out, this team will start to look better because, one, you can just start projecting more playing time to some guys. Not necessarily the most appealing guys. Javonte Green probably plays a bit more if Ingram is out. Brandon Boston could play a bit more, although we didn't see that yesterday. He barely played. But you would get more production opportunities from guys like McCollum and Murray. If this game stays competitive, though, I do think you're looking at like low to mid 30s minutes from all the main pieces. I went with a 32-minute projection on Ingram since he has missed a few games. I went 33 apiece on Murray and McCollum. McCollum played 25 yesterday, but we have seen him play as much as, I think, 36. Yeah, 36 2 games ago. So 30, 36, 25 since coming back from his injury. Might actually end up bumping him to like 34 minutes here. Again, you have a 10-point spread, so I'm not projecting this to be super competitive. I'm not going, 36 minutes to all these guys. But one thing I did like about DeJounte Murray yesterday, the Pelicans got absolutely destroyed by the Knicks. This game was over at halftime. It was very over by the end of the third quarter. The Pelicans ran DeJounte Murray for the entire third quarter. So he ended up getting up to 30 minutes. And I think that was usually when you see teams do this, when guys come back from injury, it's because the player is fully healthy and they're just trying to get them cardio, get them back into game shape so that they can really start playing them big minutes in the near future. So if they're trying to do that with DeJounte Murray, he's still not blowout proof here. Like, you still want more than 28 to 30 minutes from Murray. But if they are trying to do that with him and they do it again today, it does make him a little bit safer. Now, on the second half of a back-to-back, maybe they wouldn't. But it does just make me think that he is fully healthy. And if this game is competitive, that you probably, or at least there's a good chance, you're looking at a season high in minutes for Murray, 25, 33, and then 30 in his 3 games back. I do think if this game's competitive, that 35, 36 minutes are at least in the range of outcomes for DeJounte Murray. Again, not what I would project from a median standpoint. You can see on the screen I went to 33 for him, but I do think that it wouldn't be shocking if he just kind of gets really ramped up in like the Pelicans' next competitive game. So getting to him a bit more than the field, I'm like 2x. He's only projected for 9% ownership. I got to 17. McCollum, I'm right around the field at 7,400. I'm a little bit over the field here on Trey Murphy. We've been seeing a lot of playing time from him. He is somebody that can play multiple positions, which is really nice and important when you're talking about a shorthanded team like the Pels, because it means that his playing time is kind of safe no matter what's going on in the game from a foul standpoint, rotational standpoint, whatever it is. Trey Murphy can find his way onto the floor no matter what lineup the Pels are running out there, as long as Murphy's not the one in foul trouble himself, obviously. So at 6,200, he does still look good here. Projected 35 minutes. Probably could knock that back to 34, but I also at the same time think that if this game is, one that goes down to the wire, 37, 38 minutes are live for Trey Murphy. When you think about the guys backing him up, there's nobody that is forcing him off the floor. Robinson Earl, Daniel Tice have been the guys that you're using as backup fours here. You have Brandon Boston, who, again, didn't even play a ton of minutes yesterday. Javonte Green's not doing it. There's no really good backup that is forcing Trey Murphy out of this game if it's competitive. So I do think that him playing a ton of minutes is possible, even with Ingram back, if this game's competitive. So I do feel pretty decent about projecting 35 minutes here. 34, 35, 36, I think all pretty defensible. Doug said Murray is very interesting to me if Ingram is out. I got the sense him and Young didn't love each other, and Trey is obviously turnover prone. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the not liking each other narrative. I know what you're referring to, and I don't disagree. I just have no idea how it impacts basketball, from a DFS standpoint. But the turnover prone part, you do have somebody in Murray that can obviously rack up defensive stats and just does a lot of things well, which is one thing that's nice. Like, even if Ingram is back, Ingram, obviously a high usage guy, does get assists, does rebound to some extent. But like DeJounte Murray, one of the better rebounding guards in the NBA. You get rebounds from him, you get assists from him, you still get scoring from him, you get defensive stats. He's somebody that kind of can just blend and produce fantasy points no matter who he's playing with, which is really, really nice, and does give you a pretty high ceiling. So even with Ingram projected in, I like DeJounte. If Ingram's out, I probably will like him more. Like, his projection would obviously go up a little bit. The big question would be, if Ingram is out, does the field just rotate to playing a bunch of DeJounte Murray? In which case, maybe my interest in him actually doesn't necessarily increase. But from a projection standpoint, he would benefit if Ingram is out. So would McCollum. Misi here, 5,100, center only. Probably playing 28 to 30 minutes, give or take, if he avoids foul trouble here. Doesn't have the most difficult matchup as far as avoiding fouls. You'll have Trae Young attacking the rim that can draw some fouls, but not going up against a high usage center. Capella, not a high usage guy, pretty tough to rack up fouls against him. Same for Okongwu. So that is beneficial. If he is fouling, it's probably like Jalen Johnson getting to the basket or Trae Young getting to the basket, stuff like that, which obviously can happen. But center only does make it tough to really prioritize him. I'm not getting too much. Fields at 5%. As far as other guys, the Fields getting to, Ingram showing up 5%. I can take it or leave it. I would expect that we get some sort of news on his playing time if he is in. My expectation for right now is that he probably plays close to full minutes, but I went a little bit lower than Murray and McCollum. We have seen, looking at Murray and McCollum, they weren't brought back from injury until they were basically ready to go. 30 minutes right out of the gate for McCollum, 25-33 for DeJounte in his first 2 games back, like I mentioned. So I'm not expecting, unless we hear it, that if Ingram is in, that you're getting some like substantial minutes limit. I think it's more likely that they just, if he's not ready to play close to full minutes, they just hold him out another game. So that's my expectation, unless I hear otherwise. It's not really showing up for me. 8,500, very expensive price tag, because you have to keep in mind that Ingram has played the majority of the season without Murray, McCollum, Zion. So he's just been the only mouth to feed. And so now when he comes back, he's coming back to DeJounte, he's coming back to CJ McCollum, and he's just naturally going to be overpriced from a median standpoint. So if you are playing him, it's simply because he's 5% owned and it's still Brandon Ingram. He can still have a big game. But when you look at the ownership, I can make that same play for cheaper going to a similarly owned DeJounte Murray at 8K or a similarly owned McCollum at 7,400. Those guys both also fit that bucket of, well, he's a good NBA fantasy producer, and maybe he'll have a big game at low ownership, the same way that Brandon Ingram does. On the Atlanta side, big favorites here. Not, I've mentioned this before on shows, but not typically as concerned about blowouts with the team that is favored, just because if they blow out the opponent by a wide enough margin that they lose significant minutes, at least somebody on the team probably is producing at a really high rate. Now, again, you would prefer that you get the blowout where you'd prefer not to get a blowout at all. But if you get one, you'd prefer the one where the Hawks play until there's 4 minutes left in the game, as opposed to the one where they're done, with 50 points through 3 quarters. But still, especially on a 4-game slate where every game has a pretty wide spread, if you get the game where Atlanta just beats the Pels by 30, as long as Atlanta is actually scoring points and it's not just that like they're winning 70-40, then you probably still got good fantasy performances from, at least one of these guys. Jalen Johnson, 8,200, pretty good price tag for him, getting 31% ownership. I have 23%, which I think looks pretty good. The price tag is very reasonable. Johnson having a good season. As far as injuries here for Atlanta, a bunch of questionable guys, but they're all like non-rotation pieces. Bogdanovich is probable. Trae Young is probable. So nothing that actually matters, at least right now, from an injury standpoint, unless one of those guys were to get downgraded. So projecting them to be full strength, which means that you have probably 28 minutes or so going to DeAndre Hunter, probably about 26 minutes going to Bogdanovic. Those minutes can fluctuate a little bit, but we have been seeing Hunter play a little bit more than Bogdanovic. It also does open the door for Atlanta to play a little bit smaller. They haven't been doing it consistently, but they also haven't necessarily had Hunter and Bogdanovic in that many games yet, and also haven't necessarily had the best matchups. But if you go back a few games ago where these guys were in the game against, I don't remember who they were playing, but the game on the I think it was the 29th, you got 22 minutes from Okongwu, you got 25 from Capella. So I think it was this game where there were basically 2 minutes that Jalen Johnson played at center. That is something that maybe they start doing a little bit more of. Actually, it was the game on, I don't know. It doesn't matter what game it was. It was a game before one of the Cleveland games. They were playing a smaller opponent, and Jalen Johnson did get some minutes at the 5, which is something we hadn't seen much of this year. Then, and they closed with Hunter and Bogdanovic alongside Johnson. So they closed with the small lineup where it was like Young, Daniels, Bogdanovic, Hunter, Johnson. That is something you could see against smaller teams. They then played the next game where both these guys were in. They played Cleveland, which was a team where you're not expecting to see that with Jared Allen. So I projected like 1 minute here to Jalen Johnson at center. Still got me close to 48 from Capella, close to 48, or from Capella plus Okongwu combined. I went 22.5 minutes to Capella, 24.5 to Okongwu. It didn't get me to too much of either one. Right around the field, 10%. Capella at 5,400, a little bit below the field on Okongwu at 4,800. He's probably, if you're playing on FanDuel, going to look better over there, assuming that he does still have power forward eligibility like he has for most of the season. But, the point here being that you're still expecting around 48 minutes from them, but there is the potential against some smaller opponents that you do start to see maybe like 45, 46 minutes in those matchups when Bogdanovic and Hunter are in. Getting right around the field on Trae Young, 25% of my lineups, 8,800, pretty decent price tag here. No Herb Jones obviously makes the Pels defense a bit worse, but DeJounte Murray is a quality defender. So life's not going to be super easy for Trae Young, but easier probably than it would be if Herb Jones were active. At 8,800 on a 4-game slate, I don't really have any issues with this ownership. I'm a little bit over the field on 5K DeAndre Hunter, projected him for 28 minutes. There are ways, if this game's competitive, that he plays like 30. So I don't think 28 is super aggressive. Getting, a little bit above the field on him and Bogdanovic, who at 4,600, I think looks pretty good off the bench, probably playing 25 to 27 minutes, somewhere in that range. And then Capella, Daniels, Okongwu, kind of just rounding things out as lower priority plays. So there's nobody on Atlanta that the field's getting to that I'm not. I am just getting to them a pretty decent amount here. Brooklyn is a mess, as they have been for, I don't know, the last 2 weeks or so. We have Dorian Finney-Smith out. Cam Thomas is out. Zaire Williams is now also out. Ben Simmons also out. Cameron Johnson is questionable. Noah Clowney is out. Boyan is still out. So for now, projected Cam Johnson in. My guess at the starting lineup here, which it is a guess because we haven't seen this exact combination of guys out, but my guess is that you get Keon Johnson, Dennis Schroeder, Jalen Wilson, Cameron Johnson, assuming he plays, and Nicholas Claxton. I am using baseline minutes here. I haven't actually gone through and done my adjustments for Brooklyn, but I think that all this stuff looks pretty reasonable. $3,500 for Keon Johnson is going to look good, regardless of whether he starts or not, because if he comes off the bench, he's still probably going to play a pretty decent number of minutes. They just don't have that many bodies, but his ownership would come down. So, but assuming he starts, you're just expecting 28, 30 minutes, somewhere in that range from him at 3,500, 69% projected ownership. I got to 78%. It's just a value play that I think is pretty difficult to get away from, given just how banged up Brooklyn is. You think about how do things go wrong from a playing time standpoint. Obviously Keon Johnson can just suck. That is how things go wrong. But from a playing time standpoint, you think about like, how does he not get enough minutes to look good at this price? And the answers are basically like Shake Milton plays a bunch, or Tyrese Martin plays more. Like you can obviously get lineups where it's like Dennis Schroeder, Jalen Wilson, Cam Johnson, Tyrese Martin, Claxton, stuff like that, where Keon Johnson doesn't have to play a ton, but even if he plays 22, 24 minutes, he probably can give you like a decent performance. And if he's playing well, he can play even more than 28 minutes. So he's just going to look like a really good value, assuming he's starting. Cameron Johnson getting 38% ownership, 6,600 without Cam Thomas out there chucking up shots. He is going to look good. Cam Thomas is a very high usage guy, and taking him off the floor is just going to make anybody else that can shoot or will shoot at all look better. Cameron Johnson has that's since last year, which isn't helpful. Cameron Johnson without Cam Thomas on the floor, 22.3% usage rate so far this season. His usage rate in general is like 18%. So you do see a bump there. Not even as much as I would necessarily have expected, but 1.05 DraftKings points per minute without Thomas on the floor. Dennis Schroeder without Thomas on the floor, 28.7% usage rate, 41.8% assist percentage, 1.2 DraftKings points per minute. At 7,100, I'm still getting to 43% of him. Fields at 37%. So very happy to get to those two guys that, even though they are relatively expensive, just benefit here, both in the sense that they should play a lot, but also a lot of shots to go around. Keon Johnson's not somebody you're expecting to go out there and chuck shots. You're not expecting Jalen Wilson to take a bunch of shots. Nick Claxton's not taking a bunch of shots. So there's just not that many guys that can take usage away from Dennis Schroeder and Cameron Johnson. Trendon Watford getting 21% projected ownership right now at 4,400. Does have power forward eligibility. I'm only getting to 6%. I think 22 minutes is a very reasonable projection for him. I wouldn't mind getting a little bit more as a value play. He has produced 0.94 DraftKings points per minute this year. Not having Simmons does open up front court minutes, but you do also have Day'Ron Sharpe back. He's been out for the entire season. Don't know how much he plays. Have him projected for 14 minutes right now. Could go to like 16. I think that would be fine. He is 3K flat. I'm getting a bunch of him. Somebody mentioned it in chat. But Watford should get minutes with or without Sharpe. Like, you're missing Simmons, you're missing Clowney, you're missing, other guys that make it more difficult for the Nets to slide everybody down a position when they go small. So I do expect enough minutes from Watford for him to project pretty well. Have a 22 fantasy point projection on him. So I think it's just an ownership thing. We're at 21%. There are enough other guys in this range that I can play. You saw on the previous game, for example, I was getting to DeAndre Hunter and Bogdanovich at lower ownership and similar prices. I think those are both very solid pivots. But Watford looks fine. I'm around the field on Claxton, getting 19% ownership at 6K. Playing time should be up a bit, not having Simmons, and also, again, just not having a lot of bodies on Brooklyn, which makes it more difficult for them to do something like play Cam Johnson a bunch of minutes at the 5, because he needs to play those minutes elsewhere. We did get 28 minutes from Claxton last game as well, which just looks good. Projected him for 28 or 27 and a half here. So he looks good at 6K. Day'Ron Sharpe in 14 minutes, still showing up 30% of the time for me. That makes me think he just looks like a really good play at 16% ownership. He certainly could play more. This is his first game back this year. So wanted to be, at least somewhat pessimistic on the minutes. Didn't go like a full 48 to him and Claxton, which is something that, later on in the season, maybe you would. But Sharpe is a very good point per minute guy. It is only a 4-game slate, so the opportunity cost is lower. Also, keep in mind that my interest in him will come down at least somewhat as other players start getting ruled out, as you get more value. Like, because I projected the Boston guys in that are questionable and projected all the questionable players on this slate in, right now it looks like there's not a ton of value, but there probably will be by lock, and it'll just make Sharpe look worse. But he's still, a good point per minute guy, 3K. Since the start of last season, 1.25 DraftKings points per minute. So still projects well for the price, even in 14 minutes. But interest in him, does also depend on value elsewhere on the slate. Jalen Wilson getting 16% ownership at 4,700. I'm getting to 5%. Shake Milton getting 10% at 3,700. I'm getting to 2%. They're both guys that should play enough minutes that they have upside at their respective salaries. Wilson is getting somewhat expensive, but just should play a lot of minutes here, especially without Zaire Williams as well. Only played 21 and a half last game in his start, but he also picked up 2 fouls in the first 3.5 minutes of that game. He subbed back in, picked up his third foul after another 3.5 minutes. So he only played like 7 minutes in the first half because of fouls. He then picked up fouls 4 and 5 within the first 2 minutes. of the third quarter. So you can completely throw away the 21 and a half minutes that Jalen Wilson played last game. That was not indicative of anything other than he almost fouled out in 21 minutes. So I do expect low to mid 30s from him at 4,700, which is just going to make him project as a decent play. Only 0.71 DraftKings points per minute overall this season. Now you do get obviously no Cam Thomas, no Williams, no Finney Smith, Cam Thomas being the big one. Without Cam Thomas on the floor, Wilson's still at 0.75 DraftKings points per minute, 16.5% usage rate. So you don't expect a huge uptick for him because Cameron Johnson and Dennis Schroeder are likely to step in and take more of those shots. But a decent value, even though I'm not getting quite as much as the field. And then Shake Milton, like I said, I assume he's coming off the bench and Keon Johnson is starting. You could get Shake Milton starting. He is one of the only ball handlers this team has. You have him, you have Keon, you have Schroeder. Pretty much it. So I do expect the minutes to be there, even if he comes off the bench, probably playing mid-20s. If he starts, probably playing more. One other nice thing about Shake Milton, and this applies to Milton, it applies to Wilson, it applies to Watford, it applies to Keon Johnson. If any of these guys are actually playing really well, they probably just play more minutes. So their playing time tonight probably is pretty heavily correlated with how they play because none of them are particularly good NBA players. The Nets don't have any sort of like allegiance to these guys where they are going to say, oh, well, they're good and they'll probably turn it around. Like if Dennis Schroeder plays poorly for a 6-minute stretch, they're going to be like, Dennis Schroeder's still one of the best guys we have. And so he's going to stay out there. If Keon Johnson's playing poorly and Shake Milton's playing well, they're going to just probably play Shake Milton over Keon Johnson for stretches because he's the hot hand and Keon Johnson's not particularly good. Not to say that Milton is, but he's at least playing good in the moment. So all of those, kind of fringe periphery guys on the Nets do have kind of some added volatility in their playing time that goes along with how exactly they are playing. So the Nets are a team that I'm going to get a ton of, the field's going to get a ton of. How exactly you handle it, depends on the person, but there's a lot of stuff to like from the Nets because they are so shorthanded. Also in a really good spot here against the Bulls. Mamba said, is there a particular game that you're looking at targeting for leverage? No, I mean, I don't really think in those terms. Like if there's a team, and there hasn't really been so far, if there's a team that like I'm getting a lot of that the field isn't, it's not that I looked at it from like a game standpoint and just want to target it. It's that, maybe I'm projecting the game a little bit differently. Like yesterday I was heavy on some pieces in the OKC Houston game, not because I thought that like the total was wrong or anything like that. It was just that I thought it could go small. And so like I projected more minutes than the industry to Jabari Smith, to Tari Eason, to guys like that. And it just made me get to a lot of them. So usually if I'm just like over on a game, that's probably why, but it's not that I'm like looking at the game and actively targeting it. So if there is one of those games, you'll just end up seeing it pop up when I get to that team. On the other side for the Bulls, we have Kobe White questionable, obviously a big piece there as far as opening up minutes and usage. Still no Patrick Williams, which means that we should still get Ayo Dosunmu in the starting lineup. I am getting to a ton of Vooch right now at 8,400, and that's not somebody that I'm ever going to be upset about getting a lot of, obviously. Nothing on the 5:30 injury report yet. It doesn't look like that is relevant to tonight. Kind of surprised I'm getting so much Vooch just because, center, even on a 4-game slate, is a relatively deep position. But I think basically what's happening here is Vooch is projected for 18% ownership at 8,400. Bam is projected for 32% at 8,100. So basically the same price. I have Vooch, projected like a point higher. He's a little bit more expensive. So I have basically relative to salary, the same expectations for Vooch and for Bam. And the field is projected to play Bam twice as much as they're playing Vooch. So I'm just getting a bunch of Vooch. And, you can see that kind of like I'm playing Bam at the same rate that the field's projected to play Vooch, and I'm playing Vooch at a higher rate than they're projected to play Bam, but still give or take, kind of just playing Vooch like the field plays Bam, and then playing Bam like the field plays Vooch, which is something that always makes me happy when I see my process show up that way, because it's not something that I'm like doing manually, but it is the way that I would like to approach spots from a theory standpoint. When I think two players are about the same and the field has a clear preference, I just want to play more of the other one since I think that they're basically the same thing. So that's, I think, why I'm getting so much Vooch. It does also, when you're watching the show, like I was saying at the beginning, that I'm under the field on Bam, but it's still Bam. Like I wouldn't mind getting more. If when I run lineups before I enter, before lock, and ownership has changed to where Vooch is projected for 25% and Bam's projected for 25%, then you're probably going to just see me play 25-30% Vooch, 25-30% Bam, somewhere, in that range. So it's not that I strongly prefer Vooch. It's just that I don't really care between the two of them. I think they're about the same. And if the field just wants to pick one, I will pick the other one. So that's really what's happening here, I think, for the most part. I would assume I'm right around the field at 13%. 5,300, should play 30, 32 minutes, somewhere in that range. Not a good point per minute guy. Moving into the starting lineup obviously doesn't help that because he's playing alongside Zach LaVine, Vooch, and possibly Kobe White. But the playing time at this salary still just looks pretty good. 29, 30, 31, 32 minutes over his last 4 games. He played 38 in that first game against Houston when he moved into the starting lineup. That was an NBA Cup game that mattered. And then that was also a game where immediately after, Billy Donovan said, shit, I played DeSunmu more than I wanted to. I played Kobe White more than I wanted to. And then he has walked it back to where he's playing in 30 to 32 minutes. You're still going to have some games probably where DeSunmu plays more than that because he's playing well or whatever the case may be. But from an average playing time standpoint, expecting 30 to 32 minutes from DeSunmu is very reasonable. And it just makes him a pretty decent point per dollar projection until this price tag comes up. Not too far off the field on Zach LaVine at 7,800, 11% projected ownership for the field. I'm at 7, a little below the field on Giddey as well, 6,300. I think both of these price tags are just pretty much correct. Zach LaVine is somebody that I would like a lot more if I could project his minutes a little bit heavier, but we've seen the Bulls just be not cautious. Like he's still playing 34, 35 minutes in competitive games. And I said NBA Cup Bulls Rockets. It was Hawks Rockets. The Bulls were playing somebody else. But it was, I think they were playing somebody else. But either way, it was a game that like the Bulls played all their guys very heavily down to the end. I think that was the day the Hawks played the Rockets it was Hawks Bulls is what it was, I think. There were a lot of red teams all on my TV at the same time. The Rockets were playing somebody. The Wizards were playing the Celtics on a bright red court. I think Bulls and Hawks were playing, if that makes sense. I know it was a game where I needed it to end quietly, and instead, like Jalen Johnson, Vooch, Kobe White, everybody just went nuts in the last 2 minutes. So yeah, I think it was Hawks Bulls. But it was a game that it was both teams were still playing for something. It was like a relatively not competitive game, but they all just played down to the end. Yeah, I think that's what it was. But whatever it was, there were a ton of red teams playing in an NBA Cup game, and the Bulls played all their guys straight through. LaVine, again, if you were getting like 36, 37, 38-minute games from him, he would project a little bit differently because you could be a little bit more aggressive with his minutes, go to like 34, 35. But just seeing the Bulls not be cautious, but like just not really go balls to the wall with his playing time like they have, last year or even maybe earlier this season, it does just kind of limit the projection a little bit to where he looks like a good but not great play at 7,800. It's not because of a lack of upside or point per minute production. It's just him not necessarily getting those extra minutes that guys in his price range do when they're playing well. Tatum and White are available. Sam Hauser is out. That one came out of nowhere, so I will not be playing a bunch of Sam Hauser, obviously. We did not get... Who else was questionable? We did not get... it was just we didn't get a Jaylen Brown update. So Brown's still questionable. Hauser is now out. Tatum and White are in. I would assume if Brown plays that the starting lineup is White, Brown, Tatum, Ketta, and I have no idea. They could go Pritchard, but like they normally don't like to. So you could just get a spot start from somebody random. It could be Pritchard. Either way, we'll have that starting lineup before the game starts. Hauser being out, though, is going to open up more minutes for Pritchard, whether he starts or not. And it does go back to, what I was saying about the way they used Drew Peterson last night. Drew Peterson will be the guy that the non-rotation guy that I give minutes to first when I'm trying to figure out where minutes go between him and Walsh and whatever other shit the Celtics have. So just something to keep in mind when we do get confirmation on Jaylen Brown and the starting lineup here. Twitter to answer where do I see Hauser out. I follow the Underdog fantasy account. They are quick with everything. Also, if I just update my injury report, I would assume that it's on there. No, it's actually not on the injury report, but I assume that a Boston reporter just reported it. It was for personal reasons, not injury reasons. So that would be why he wasn't on the injury report all day. Nothing else really getting ownership from the Bulls. If Kobe White is out, I don't really know. Maybe you get Craig or Bucelis moving into the starting lineup. You would expect at least somewhat of an uptick in playing time for those guys. You would expect an uptick in production from Vooch and Levine if White is out. Beyond that, I don't know who moves into the starting lineup. Do they go to one of the bigs? Do they, I don't know, they've ramped up Lonzo a little bit lately. Do they give him 4 6-minute rotations or something? He played 22 minutes last game, so that's something that maybe they could do, which is something I'll point out here too. Lonzo's 4K. The baseline projection that I used for him was 19 minutes. I haven't done these minutes yet though. I do think that going a little bit higher than that makes sense. I don't know that it gets him into lineups on this slate because we're going to have plenty of value. But that is something that in general, I want to just be aware of, that Lonzo played 22 minutes. After the game, Donovan said that he'd been cleared to play more. He was feeling really good. He wanted to play more, so I do think that Lonzo, as long as the salary stays down in general, Lonzo might end up being like a sneaky play sooner than later. I just don't know if this will end up being the slate for it because of value. But if Kobe White's out, something to keep in mind. You have a 3K Javon Carter that maybe ends up becoming a thing. Dallin Terry is also 3K. I assume, probably plays more minutes. He's actually been in the rotation for most of the season. He hasn't been playing a ton lately, but again, that coincides with ball playing more. Talen Horton-Tucker's played 14 to 18 minutes in 4 straight games and is a very good point per minute guy. He's 3,200. So there are a lot of different ways the Bulls can go. If White is out, there are a lot of minutes to fill. I haven't, gone through and done those projections yet, so I don't have a really good lean on it. But I would say there's the two things that kind of stand out to me beyond the obvious are that Horton-Tucker's been in the rotation lately. He's somebody that's been in and out of the rotation for a lot of the year, but he's actually been in the rotation. He produces fantasy points, and he can handle the ball a bit. So he's somebody that I think I would be kind of bullish on his minutes if Kobe White is out, even if he's not starting. And then Lonzo, just keeping in mind that they did ramp up his minutes last game, obviously a natural replacement for what Kobe White does. Not that I'm saying I think you get huge minutes from Lonzo, but that's just something to keep in mind that he's playing more than 16 minutes now or 18 minutes or whatever. So those two guys are the ones that outside of just the obvious I would want to keep in mind if Kobe White is out. Finally, for the Lakers taking on the Timberwolves, this show is running longer than I planned, but 4 games, there's just always so much to talk about. Not getting to a lot of the Lakers right now. They also have questionable guys on their injury report. Not the most significant, but Austin Reeves is questionable, which clearly matters a lot. Cam Reddish is questionable, which matters less. D'Angelo Russell is probable after missing yesterday. Jalen Hood-Schifino is questionable, which does not really matter at all. Anthony Davis is probable. Jackson Hayes is out. Jared Vanderbilt and Christian Wood are still out, as they have been all season long. We got 12, 13 minutes from Hood-Schifino yesterday, but again, with Russell back, I don't he's not going to play enough minutes to matter even if he's in. But the Austin Reeves piece is obviously really, really important. I assume that you would get Russell moving into the starting lineup if he's out, but even if you don't, you're just going to get more minutes from Russell if Reeves is out. He clearly, fills that role that Reeves has. Russell's only 4,400. So I think he's playable even if Reeves is in. I didn't get to him in this set of lineups, but at 5% ownership, 24-minute projection, he's playable on a 4-game slate anyway. But if Reeves is out, Russell gets a big bump. He looks good. LeBron and Davis right now, the two guys that clearly, you want to be getting to, both projected for 10 to 15% ownership. I'm getting the 10 to 15%. They both just look fine. It's Anthony Davis. It's LeBron. You know what you're getting there. Should play, 36 minutes, give or take, and look pretty good. If Reeves is out, you do potentially get some more ball handling, some more assist opportunities for LeBron also. If Reeves is in, I'm not getting there right now. The field is not really getting there. Dalton Connect, 5K. He'll look a bit better too if Reeves and Reddish are out, just because you can get more minutes. He still only played 30 yesterday. He's not somebody that's a lock to play huge minutes. But if he's knocking down his shots, they obviously have the ability to leave him out there a lot more. So sub 10% ownership at 5K. I think he's okay. He'll look marginally better if Reeves is out and Reddish is out, but mostly it's just, is he knocking down a bunch of threes? If he is, great play. If he's not a great play. Obviously, no way to know that going in. So injury news that does matter here. Austin Reeves not getting any ownership at 6,500 and probably shouldn't. Christie played 30 minutes yesterday. Vincent got the start, played 31 and a half. Again, those guys do lose minutes if Russell is back. But if Reddish is out and Reeves is out, even with Russell back, there are minutes available for those guys where they're probably not going to look like great plays, but at 3,300 for Vincent and 3,700 for Christie, they're at least, guys that you should probably have in the mix if you're playing a bunch of lineups, if Reeves and Reddish are out. And then finally for Minnesota, this is a team that rotation-wise, I think actually has some interesting stuff going on. I'm getting to a ton of Mike Conley here. 4,800, just a good price tag, sub 5K. Probably does come down a little bit if, as other guys get ruled out, just because I'll have other options. But running everything with the questionable guys projected in, sub 5K Conley just looks like a good value. You've been seeing more playing time from him recently than you were getting earlier in the season. And him missing a few games with, I think it was a sprained toe, didn't do anything to slow that down. Prior to the games he missed, he had gotten 37 and 30 minutes. Then he missed a few games, immediately comes back, plays 32 minutes and 33 minutes. I went to 32 minutes here. He's getting 40% ownership. I'm basically 2x the field right now. Again, my exposure to him probably comes down a bit as I just get more options in that price range, but I think that he looks like a good value. Now, where things get interesting here is with the Julius Randle, Naz Reid piece. Julius Randle, 7,700, getting 24% ownership. It's a good price tag. There is, the Randle playing in the Lakers narrative, which is cool. The thing that concerns me a little bit about Randle is the issues that Minnesota is having, both in terms of just the way that they're playing basketball and then also just gelling and meshing together. It's been pretty apparent, but you've had Anthony Edwards actually speak on it specifically. It has seemed that the biggest issue right now is getting Randle and Gobert on the same page. And so far lately, Gobert's been the one getting a ton of minutes while Randle hasn't. Randle played 30 minutes in regulation last game in a competitive game. The game before that, he played 35 minutes, which is normal for him. Or that was 2 games ago, I think. He also had a game where he played 35 or 36 minutes, but it was an overtime game. So in 2 of his last 3 games, he's played 30 minutes in regulation. Gobert has been playing huge minutes. 43 in regulation last game, 37, 44 in an overtime game, so 39 in regulation in his last 3. I'm not saying that this, completely keeps up. I'm not saying Randle just averages 30 minutes per game now, but I did knock a minute off of Randle. I went to 33 on him. I went 37 on Gobert. I mean, I think you could actually be even more aggressive on Gobert if you wanted to, but I just mentioned that on Randle. Not that I think he's a bad play. I'm getting to 9%, but I am a little bit lower than the field just because I'm a little cautious with kind of the way Minnesota seems to be reacting to the issues that they're having right now. Still, Randle's, if he's playing well, he's going to probably play more. But I am a little bit concerned about his playing time over the last couple of games. Now, the other part of this is Naz Reid is $4,700. He has power forward eligibility. And basically, the way that this should be projected is barring blowout, garbage time run, Naz Reid, Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert are combining for 96 minutes. We're seeing that basically game after game after game at this point, that those 3 guys are playing 96 minutes. So if you get the game where Randle plays 36 and Gobert plays 40, Reed's in trouble because he's playing, 20 minutes. But if you, on average, you're going to get 25 minutes, give or take, from Naz Reid. The games where Randle plays 30 and Gobert plays, 38, you're probably getting 28 minutes from Reid. Games where it's 34 and 38, you're getting, I don't know, whatever 96 minus that number is from Reid. So the playing time is going to be volatile for Reid because it does depend on exactly how much Randle and Gobert play. But you're not seeing, and this isn't to say that you never will, but for the most part, you're just not seeing them use McDaniels in place of Reed lately. And so at that price tag, given that Reed is a good point per minute guy, I'm pretty happy getting overweight to him here at 18% projected ownership, because I just think he's playing essentially every minute that Randall, Gobert don't play. Here I projected, I think, 1 minute to go elsewhere, but for the most part, he's just playing every minute that one of them is not on the floor. And it's also nice that he backs up both positions, because it means if you do get a game that Gobert is in foul trouble, Reed benefits. If you get a game that Randall's in foul trouble, Reed benefits. So there's kind of like two different ways for him to get extra minutes, in addition to, I think, just being a good point per dollar projection, even at where I think his average playing time is. A bankroll said Rui's minutes have been ramping up too. Played 30. Yeah. He played 40 yesterday with everybody out, with those guys out. So I'm not expecting, 40 again, but the baseline that I used for Rui here was 32. As guys get ruled out, I think you kind of add on to that. But yeah, that's a good point there. That playing time has been ramping up for him. Gobert, 11% projected ownership at 6,700. I got 11%. The playing time has been great. As I mentioned, I think you really could make an argument for going like 38 minutes on Gobert. The negative for Gobert is that his usage is down this year, and it's just made him not as good a fantasy producer. Obviously still rebounds at a high rate, gets blocks at a high rate, but only has a 12.4% usage rate this season. Obviously, he's not a high usage guy, but he is a very efficient scorer, because everything he's shooting is basically just a dunk. So just, going back to the start of last season, he has a 15.5% usage rate. Going from 15.5% to 12.5%, while 15.5% isn't high, when you're talking about somebody that makes, 75% of the shots he takes, it's a big difference. His usage rate last year was 16.3%. So that is a negative there that has kept his fantasy production down a bit this year. And I think some of it just has to do with the presence of Julius Randle, kind of a different team here than you had previously. So he's only at 0.88 DraftKings points per minute, which is obviously not ideal. The counterpoint to that is, if you do have a game where he just gets a little bit more usage, then you're pretty quickly able to get back to the 1.1, 1.15 fantasy points per minute. So there is plenty of upside for him at $6,700. And then Anthony Edwards, clearly very high upside play at 9,300, getting to 13% right now. Field has 10. As more value opens up, Anthony Edwards just starts to look better, because there will be more additional combinations of ways to get to him that'll make him look good. So obviously like getting to Edwards there, but pretty interesting slate. A lot of moving parts still. We didn't get a whole lot cleared up during this show, other than Tatum and Brown being in and Hauser being out. So that kind of just opened up even more questions. So yeah, good luck on your lineups tonight. Thank you for checking out the show. My goal is to do this show every day this week. We have decent NBA slates every day as far as number of games. I don't have anything conflict-wise that I have thought of off the top of my head. So should be here every day this week. 4:45 start time, give or take. Be sure to subscribe to the Endgame Syndicate YouTube channel. Also, sign up, join Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. Follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. I'll tweet out every day there when I'm going live as well. Doug said, wait, is Jaylen Brown in? Oh, did I say Brown? I meant Tatum and White. Misspoke. Brown is questionable. Tatum, White are in, and Hauser is out. Bogdan Bogdanovic available to play. He was probable. So is Trae Young. But yeah, I misspoke. Sorry about that. Jaylen Brown is questionable still. Tatum is in. White is in. Hauser is out. Thanks again for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. And I will be back here at the same time again tomorrow. Good luck on your lineups tonight.